Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into one of history's most, enduring mysteries, ancient Egypt.
It really is something else.
We're talking about a civilization that stood strong for an astonishing 3,000 continuous years. I mean, just think about that longevity for a moment.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around.
While mighty empires like Mesopotamia, China's early dynasties, the Indus Valley, they all rose, flourished, and eventually faded.
Right. They had their time.
But only Egypt on the Nile somehow maintained its core identity for 30 centuries.
It's truly remarkable when you consider the sheer scale of time and all the challenges they faced. Floods, famines, invasions, occupations.
So the big question is how? How did a society maintain its fundamental character through all of that for so long?
Exactly. And that's our mission today, isn't it? To try and uncover the secrets behind this incredible resilience.
We want to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from, millennia of history.
Help you understand what allowed ancient Egypt not just to survive, but to thrive, to adapt, and become one of the longest-lasting civilizations the world has ever seen.
Okay, so let's unpack this incredible story, right from its earliest beginnings.
Where do we start? Way back.
Way back. Long before the pyramids dominated the landscape, maybe around 10,000 BCE, North Africa was actually much wetter, more hospitable.
Yeah, not the desert we picture today. Early inhabitants were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We find their stone tools, evidence in rock shelters, that sort of thing.
That's right. But then, around 7,000 BCE, a significant climate shift started happening.
Things got drier.
Exactly. The region started to dry out, forcing these nomadic groups to congregate along the predictable lifeline of the Nile River.
And this was a monumental pivot. I mean, moving from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture.
A whole new way of life.
They started cultivating barley and emmer wheat, domesticated cattle, goats, and they established the first permanent villages along the riverbanks.
And this is where the Nile itself becomes just this almost legendary character in Egypt's story.
Absolutely central.
Unlike other ancient river civilizations dealing with wildly unpredictable floods, the Nile's annual inundation happened with remarkable regularity.
Predictable flooding, yeah. Every summer, it would swell, deposit this incredibly rich, mineral-laden silt, just perfect soil.
Exceptionally fertile.
And what's fascinating here is how that predictability, it wasn't just a practical farming advantage. It profoundly shaped the early Egyptian psyche.
How so?
It instilled this deep sense of cosmic order, a rhythm they could rely on. It embedded a belief in stability and continuity that would underpin their entire society for millennia.
So even in these really early communities, we see sophisticated beliefs about death, the afterlife, showing up in complex burial practices.
Definitely. And a fantastic example of that early sophistication is the stone circles at Nebta Playa down in southern Egypt.
Oh, right, Playa.
Around 5000 BCE, these Stone Age people built one of the world's oldest astronomical observatories. They were tracking solstices, equinoxes.
Wow. So already showing an early grasp of celestial movements, things that would become absolutely central later on.
Central to their religion, their architecture, everything. And their material culture flourished, too. Distinctive pottery traditions emerged, like that beautiful black-topped red ware from Upper Egypt.
And craftsmen got more skilled, right? Working with bone, ivory, semi-precious stones, eventually copper.
Yeah, and early figurines hinting at a growing artistic tradition.
Then, by about 4500 BCE, we start seeing clear evidence of social hierarchy creeping in.
How do we see that?
Mostly in their graves. Some burials contain noticeably more elaborate goods, more wealth. It sort of lays the groundwork for chiefdoms, proto-kingdoms.
And the archaeology shows pretty extensive trade networks already, stretching into the Levant, Nubia, even the Red Sea, long before any formal international diplomacy.
Incredible.
Indeed. By 4000 BCE, distinct regional cultures really solidified. You get the Naqada culture in the south, gradually expanding northward.
And sites like Heracompolis developing into walled towns with specialized labor.
Yeah, hinting at powerful proto-states that were, starting to coalesce into larger entities.
And then, around 3100 BCE, something truly monumental happens. A ruler from Upper Egypt, King Narmer.
Narmer, yeah, a key figure.
He achieves what must have seemed impossible before. He conquers Lower Egypt and forges the world's first territorial nation-state.
This wasn't just a conquest, it was the birth of a unified Egyptian identity.
And the visual story of this massive unification is vividly preserved on the Narmer palette.
Ah, the palette. Iconic. It's a ceremonial cosmetic slab, right?
Exactly. and it depicts Narmer wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. He embodies the dual nature of his rule.
So this isn't just some artifact. It's arguably the first example of, like, propagandistic historical narrative in art.
Totally. It established a visual language of kingship that literally endured for thousands of years.
What's truly ingenious about Narmer's approach, though, is his political genius. He didn't just conquer.
No, he positioned himself as the rightful ruler of both regions, creating this unified dual identity for the king.
And that innovation, the king, as earthly ruler and divine mediator, became the very bedrock of the whole pharaonic institution.
And this unification wasn't just symbolic, was it? It actually catalyzed practical innovations needed for governing this huge unified territory.
Absolutely. You see the accelerated development of hieroglyphic writing, which became crucial for administration.
Right, keeping records, taxes.
Standardized measurement systems, centralized tax collection, organized religious practices, all essential.
And Memphis, strategically located right at the Nile's geographic midpoint, became the administrative heart, a real symbol of this convergence.
As Egypt settled into its unified form, it entered what scholars call the early dynastic period, from about 3100 to 2686 BCE.
And during this time, these early kings further refined the writing system. They formalized how royal names were presented.
Right, often encased in those rectangular frames called sureks, sort of the very first royal insignia, precursors to the later cartouches.
The evolution of royal burial practices during this period is particularly striking.
At Abydos, yeah. Big tomb complexes.
Exactly. Archaeologists uncovered these massive tomb complexes with rows of smaller subsidiary burials. And here's a surprising fact.
Go on.
Initial excavations revealed these contained the bodies of court officials, servants, craftspeople who had been sacrificed to accompany their king into the afterlife.
Sacrifice. Wow, that's intense.
King Gerger's tomb alone had nearly 600 retainers buried with him. It's chilling. It demonstrates the extreme measures justified by divine kingship in its kind of experimental phase.
The practice they later completely abandoned, thankfully.
Yeah, as the ideology matured. But it's a stark reminder of the absolute power wielded in those early days.
So, to manage this expanding territory, the early dynastic kings divided Egypt into administrative regions called nomes.
Nomes, right. Each overseen by a nomarch, basically a provincial governor.
This created Egypt's first formal bureaucratic structure.
And remarkably, this provincial framework, these nomes, proved so fundamentally sound that it endured for thousands of years.
It really did, provided a stable administrative backbone for the civilization. This period also cemented that religious ideology portraying the king as a divine presence, a conduit for cosmic order, united with the gods after death.
So from these foundational steps of the early dynastic period, we leap into a truly transformative chapter. Dynasty 3, around 2686 BCE, with King Djoser.
Djoser and Imhotep. Here's where things get really interesting architecturally.
This relatively modest kingdom was about to become something unprecedented, capable of architectural achievements that would remain unrivaled for millennia.
Absolutely. King Djoser's ambition, combined with the sheer genius of his vizier, Imhotep, fundamentally changed the course of human history.
What truly sets this period apart is Imhotep's revolutionary design for the step pyramid complex at Saqqara.
It wasn't just a big tomb, it was humanity's first monumental stone building, period.
Rising an astonishing 204 feet high, requiring 850,000 tons of limestone. The psychological impact must have been immense.
You have to imagine, it was this tangible proclamation that the king's power transcended time itself.
And Imhotep was clearly no ordinary architect. His genius went far beyond construction.
Oh, absolutely. As Djoser's chief minister, high priest, he embodied the Egyptian ideal of the polymath. His knowledge spanned medicine, astronomy, mathematics, theology.
Which is almost unheard of for someone not of royal blood back then.
Exactly. And that's why his legacy is so remarkable. Centuries after his death, he achieved something almost impossible in Egyptian society. Deification.
Worshipped as a god of healing and wisdom. Incredible.
And this Old Kingdom period saw the full flowering of divine kingship. Pharaohs seen as living manifestations of Horus in life, Osiris after death, maintaining cosmic order, or Ma'at.
Ma'at, that fundamental principle of truth, balance, justice, permeating everything.
From the king down to the commoner. And to execute this divine mandate, Old Kingdom rulers developed what was arguably the world's first true bureaucracy.
A sophisticated administrative system, right? Extending from viziers down through overseers, scribes, tax collectors.
Capable of managing truly vast projects.
And you can't talk about vast projects without talking about the pyramids of Giza.
Exactly. How did a civilization, without modern tools, create structures so perfectly aligned to the stars? The answer lies in the Fourth Dynasty.
2613 to 2494 BCE. This is when pyramid construction hit its absolute zenith under Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure.
The precision is just staggering. Khufu's Great Pyramid, for example, initially stood nearly 147 meters tall, contains roughly 2.3 million stone blocks.
Some weighing over 15 tons.
And its base forms an almost perfect square, deviating by less than 360ths of a degree from true north. It's an engineering marvel.
And it really challenges those popular Hollywood depictions, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, the idea of masses of slaves.
Right. These monuments weren't built by slaves, but by rotating teams of skilled Egyptian laborers, supplemented by seasonal agricultural workers during the Nile flood.
We even have graffiti inside unfinished parts of the pyramids from these workers. Team names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure.
Huh. I guess even in ancient Egypt, you needed a good crew, maybe a bit of camaraderie, to get the job done.
Absolutely. And the logistical coordination for these projects was unprecedented. Specialized harbors, sourcing limestone from Tura, granite all the way from Aswan.
Constantly resharpening copper tools,
Yeah.
massive food production to feed everyone.
This was history's first truly large-scale, state-organized project, a testament to their administrative prowess.
But beyond their sheer architectural magnificence, the pyramids served a profound religious purpose.
Definitely. They were seen as cosmic machinery, designed to facilitate the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife.
Their straight passages precisely aligned to specific stars, particularly those in Orion's belt, which Egyptians associated with Osiris.
They were, in a sense, literal launch pads designed to rocket the deceased pharaoh to his place among the celestial gods. Khufu's air shafts even point directly toward key stars.
Yet after the Fourth Dynasty, we begin to see cracks in this seemingly divine facade.
Yeah, pyramid building continued, but never again reached that same colossal scale or precision. By the Sixth Dynasty, the quality declined significantly as royal power gradually diminished.
And this waning royal power would soon face its ultimate test. The very forces that built Egypt began to turn against it.
Then came the unraveling. Around 2200 BCE, climate records reveal a severe drying trend across Northeast Africa and the Middle East.
So the predictable Nile started behaving erratically.
Exactly. Years of dangerously low floods led to widespread agricultural devastation. Famine.
So what does this all mean for a society built on this idea of divine cosmic order, of Ma'at?
It struck right at the heart of pharaonic legitimacy. How could a divine king, supposed to maintain Ma'at and deliver basic necessities, fail to provide food?
It wasn't just a political crisis. It was an ideological seismic event.
Totally. And archaeological evidence from provincial cemeteries tells a really revealing story. Nomarchs, who were once just extensions of royal authority.
They started styling themselves as independent rulers.
Precisely. Their two inscriptions highlighted their own achievements, not loyalty to the pharaoh. One governor, Anktifa, proudly declared, "I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked. I brought life to the provinces when the sky was clouded and the earth parched with thirst."
That kind of statement would have been unthinkable during the Old Kingdom's height.
Absolutely. This rapid decentralization meant resources were redirected from Memphis, royal revenues plummeted, the vast bureaucracy crumbled.
And Pepi II's exceptionally long reign might have contributed to this instability too.
Possibly. By its end, Egypt transformed into autonomous territories, leading into the fragmentation of what we call the First Intermediate Period.
So from this catastrophic collapse, Egypt entered this fragmented era, roughly 2160 to 2055 BCE.
Yet, paradoxically, something unexpected happened. A kind of cultural renaissance flourished amidst the political chaos.
That's fascinating. You'd expect total collapse, maybe darkness, but instead an artistic and literary blossoming. How did that work?
Well, the collapse of central authority fostered immense regional innovation. Local workshops developed distinctive artistic styles, free from the rigid conventions of the Old Kingdom's royal court.
Okay, so decentralization allowed for more creativity.
In a way, yes. And more importantly, rulers were forced to justify their authority through action and provision, not just divine right. We see it in tomb inscriptions boasting of concrete achievements for their local people. It was a complete redefinition of leadership.
And this period sparked a literary explosion, didn't it?
Yeah.
Including Egypt's first works of political commentary, social criticism.
Yeah, like the Instruction for King Merikare, which has that great line, "Speech is stronger than any weapon,"
Yeah.
or the Admonitions of Epure, depicting a world completely overturned by famine and chaos. Really powerful stuff.
Archaeology also reveals that provincial elites flourished during this time. Elaborate tombs, sometimes surpassing those of contemporary kings.
Right. This first intermediate period created a unique window for social mobility. Individuals could rise based on competence, not just birth, a pretty rare thing in ancient Egypt.
Okay, so after nearly a century of division, the Theban king Mentuhotep II began a successful campaign of reunification around 2055 BCE.
Through military campaigns, strategic marriages, he pulled it back together.
And this reunification fundamentally rewrote the contract between the ruler and the ruled. How did that work?
Well, the shift in Egypt's political geography was dramatic. Thebes became the new power center.
Right, moving the capital south.
And its local deity, Amun, began this ascent that would eventually transform him into Amun-Ra, the supreme state god, establishing new religious authority.
And the kings themselves changed their style.
They did. Middle Kingdom rulers presented a new ideal of kind of accessible kingship, the idea that even a common farmer could demand justice.
Like in the tale of the eloquent peasant.
Exactly, a powerful story reflecting that shift.
So the Middle Kingdom, from 2055 to 1650 BCE, saw remarkable administrative reorganization, economic recovery.
Fueled by Nubian gold mines, expeditions to the fabled land of Punt for myrrh, ivory, exotic goods.
And military innovations, too, like composite bows, the Kopish sword.
And a really significant artistic breakthrough occurred. Middle Kingdom sculpture abandoned that old idealized perfection.
How so? What does it look like?
More naturalistic elements. You see furrowed brows, lined faces, even surprisingly realistic depictions of aging pharaohs. It subtly reflected the burden of leadership that these rulers visibly carried.
Interesting. And the 12th dynasty, from 1991 to 1802 BCE, that was truly a golden age, right?
Absolutely. Unprecedented administrative efficiency, cultural sophistication, successions were smooth. You see ambitious building programs like Senesret in the Shire.
And massive engineering achievements in the Fayum region. Canals, dikes, dramatically expanding agricultural capacity.
Yeah, making Lake Morris. And Senesret III emerged as the dynasty's formidable military strategist. He secured Egypt's economic interests in Nubia with massive fortresses.
Like Buhen and Semneh. They weren't just forts, were they?
No, they were military outposts and administrative centers. This period also saw standardized legal procedures, a sophisticated government balancing central authority with regional administration. Really well run.
But, like the Old Kingdom, for all its achievements, the Middle Kingdom rested on somewhat fragile foundations.
It did. The 13th dynasty saw a rapid turnover of rulers, creating administrative instability. Things started to wobble again.
And Egypt's borders, once heavily guarded, became increasingly porous.
Yeah. Canaanite peoples, who the Egyptians call Hyksos, gradually infiltrated the Delta region, settling in trading centers like Avaris.
And the final collapse came around 1650 BCE, when these rulers of foreign lands, the Hyksos, established political control over the Delta as Egypt's 15th dynasty.
Now, you mentioned the Hyksos takeover was more like a corporate merger than a hostile conquest. That's surprising. I always pictured a violent invasion.
It's an interesting way to put it, isn't it? But the archaeological evidence from Avaris, their capital in the Delta, shows distinct Levantine and Egyptian elements just side by side.
Okay, so coexistence.
Yeah, and Hyksos kings even adopted Egyptian royal titles, used Egyptian scribal traditions. While there was certainly military pressure, it suggests a more gradual assimilation and integration over time, maybe like a strategic alliance that shifted power, rather than a single, brutal overthrow.
But they certainly brought a significant military revolution with them.
Oh, absolutely. I gave them a huge advantage.
What specifically?
Horse-drawn chariots with spoked, composite wheels designed for speed, and improved bronze weapons. That gave them a decisive tactical edge.
Meanwhile, native Egyptian dynasties down in Upper Egypt, the 17th dynasty, they maintained their independence.
Right, holding out in Thebes.
And they gradually adopted these Hyksos military innovations themselves while cultivating this powerful narrative of resistance against the foreign rulers.
And what a narrative. The mummy of King Sekhemretau, tells a violent story, severe wounds from Hyksos-style battle axes. Suggests he died heroically in combat.
And his son Kamos left behind that defiant victory stele, proclaiming his determination to drive out the Hyksos.
This whole struggle culminated with Ahmose I, around 1550 BCE.
Ahmose, he's the one who finally did it.
He successfully drove out the Hyksos, reunified Egypt, and established the glorious 18th dynasty, the start of the New Kingdom.
And this victory, this experience of foreign rule, fundamentally transformed Egypt's worldview, didn't it?
Completely. Bitter memories of foreign domination led to this new, aggressive military posture, a determination to control neighboring lands, build a buffer zone. This is the birth of the Egyptian Empire.
This imperial machine was fueled by a complete revolution in Egyptian military tactics. Chariots became the centerpiece of their formidable army.
And military careers became prestigious pathways to power. The army became a permanent, professional institution.
Economically, the empire was fueled by newly secured Nubian gold mines, tribute pouring in from conquered peoples, and reopened trade routes across the Near East.
Supported by sophisticated diplomacy too, right? Diplomatic marriages, treaties.
And that fascinating practice of educating foreign rulers' children in Egypt, a kind of honored hostage-taking that fostered loyalty and cultural assimilation.
This era also ushered in a new, much more cosmopolitan court culture, embracing foreign influences in art, language, fashion.
Yeah, the empire's reach was truly astonishing, over 2,000 miles at its height. Thutmose pushed Egypt's boundaries deep into Syria.
But it was his grandson, Thutmose III, who really earned the reputation as Egypt's Napoleon, or Egypt's greatest military leader.
An astonishing 17 campaigns he led.
And a memorable anecdote from his reign is the Battle of Megiddo. He boldly led his forces through a narrow, dangerous pass, catching the enemy completely by surprise, secured a decisive victory.
His annals carved at Karnak Temple meticulously detailed the plunder from these campaigns. Powerful royal propaganda cementing his image as this invincible warrior king.
Speaking of powerful leaders, we have to talk about Hatshepsut. Reigned around 1479 BCE, she absolutely shattered ancient gender barriers.
She really did. What truly sets her reign apart is her unprecedented step of declaring herself king.
Commissioning statues showing her in traditional male regalia, complete with a false beard, while still, somehow, maintaining her identity as a woman. That's incredibly bold for any era.
It absolutely was, and her political maneuvering was brilliant. She kept Thutmose III, her stepson, as co-ruler, but claimed primary authority herself.
Securing crucial support from powerful officials like Senemet and the influential Amun priesthood.
And she prioritized economic prosperity over just military expansion, most famously documented by her spectacular expedition to the fabled land of Punt.
Right, immortalized in those beautiful reliefs at her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, bringing back incense, myrrh trees, exotic animals.
Yet after her death, Thutmose III systematically removed her from official history, chiseling her name, her image from monuments.
Why? What was the motivation behind such a deliberate act of erasure?
It seems to have been an effort to restore what was seen as the exclusive male nature of Egyptian kingship, to kind of erase the precedent she set, to maintain that traditional line.
It's a fascinating conflict, isn't it? Between an individual's will, her power, and these deeply ingrained societal norms. Shows how even the most powerful figures could be rewritten by history.
And then came the true revolutionary, Akhenaten, ascended the throne around 1380 BCE as Amenhotep V.
And he just shattered Egypt's foundational religious system, took this radical step of focusing worship on a single deity, the Aten, the sun disk.
Effectively canceling the worship of Amun-Ra and all the other traditional gods. He even changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten.
And abandoned the religious capital of Thebes for a completely new capital city, Akhetaten, which we now know as Amarna.
His revolution extended to art, too. That distinctive Amarna art style, elongated skulls, feminine hips, surprisingly intimate family scenes.
Humanizing the god king in a way that was completely new, almost shockingly so.
And Queen Nefertiti, whose famous bust is so iconic, played a prominent co-ruling role, appearing in scenes traditionally reserved only for the king.
But these radical changes were deeply unpopular, weren't they? With the powerful priesthoods, with ordinary Egyptians.
Very much so. And while Akhenaten focused intently on perfecting his new religious rituals, Egypt's vast empire began to crumble. We see this in the desperate Amarna letters.
Vassal kings in Syria and Palestine pleading for Egyptian help against encroaching enemies, help that often didn't come.
Akhenaten's name, like Hatshepsut's in a way, was systematically erased from history after his death. But his successor would become, ironically, one of the most recognized figures in all of archaeology.
Tutankhamun.
King Tut, a child king who inherited a kingdom in deep spiritual and political crisis.
So Tutankhamun, this boy king, had a very short reign, died young. What actually happened during his time? And why is he such a household name today despite a pretty unremarkable time on the throne?
Well, powerful court officials, particularly Ai and Horemheb, they basically orchestrated the restoration of the traditional religious order. They used the young king as a figurehead.
There's a restoration stela, right?
Yeah.
Justifying the return to the old gods, the move back to Thebes.
Exactly. Tutankhamun himself likely had limited real control. Evidence suggests he had physical ailments, maybe from generations of royal intermarriage. He died around age 18 or 19.
Succeeded first by Ai, then by Horemheb, who completed the erasure of the whole Amarna period. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun himself, initially.
But here's the aha moment. Despite his unremarkable reign and relative obscurity in Egyptian history, Howard Carter's discovery of his nearly intact tomb in 1922 changed everything.
Suddenly, he's archaeology's greatest celebrity.
Absolutely. That solid gold mask became a universal symbol of ancient Egypt. His tomb provided our most comprehensive window into New Kingdom royal funeral practices, the wealth, the artistry. It's an incredible paradox.
Following this tumultuous period, Ramses II, often called Ramses the Great, ascended to the throne around 1303 BCE. A pharaoh who successfully blurred the line between man and God perhaps more than any other.
He was an unprecedented builder. Obsessive architectural ambitions, particularly those magnificent temples at Abu Simbel, carved directly into sandstone cliffs.
With the 4 colossal seated figures of Ramses himself guarding the entrance. Just awe-inspiring.
And the temple's ingenious astronomical alignment is incredible. Twice a year, on dates associated with his birth and coronation, the rising sun penetrates the entire length of the temple.
To illuminate the statues of Ramses, Amun, and Ra in the innermost sanctuary, leaving Ta, the god of the underworld, symbolically in darkness.
It wasn't just architecture, it was a cosmic event orchestrated by the king to reinforce his divinity.
Ramses II also cultivated this formidable military reputation. The Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites.
Ah, yes, Kadesh. Probably a strategic stalemate in reality.
But famously transformed into Egypt's greatest triumph through his masterful propaganda carved on temple walls all across Egypt.
This campaign eventually led, though, to the world's first recorded peace treaty in 1258 BCE between Egypt and the Hittites. A replica's now at the UN, isn't it?
It is, and Ramses had a penchant for, let's say, borrowing older monuments by inscribing his own cartouche on them.
Huh. Yes, a calculated program to ensure his immortality through omnipresence. Put his name everywhere.
But even after the long and seemingly glorious reign of Ramses II, the empire began its twilight.
Yeah, succession problems followed. Merneptah, his 13th son, managed to repel significant invasions by Libyans and the mysterious Sea Peoples.
And his Israel Stole contains the earliest known written reference to Israel outside the Bible, a hugely important historical document.
Ramses III was perhaps the last truly effective pharaoh of the New Kingdom. He decisively defeated the Sea Peoples around 1175 BCE in dramatic naval and land battles depicted at his temple at Medinet Habu.
But this victory proved Pyrrhic, didn't it? It drained Egypt's already dwindling resources.
It did. An internal decay followed. We see the first recorded labor strike in history, the royal tomb workers at Deir el-Medina protesting unpaid rations.
And the infamous harem conspiracy, which actually led to Ramses III's assassination, a plot hatched within his own palace.
Power increasingly devolved to regional authorities after that, especially the high priests of Amun at Karnak in Thebes. They effectively became independent rulers in the south,
Transforming the unified New Kingdom from this centralized empire back into a patchwork quilt of competing powers.
And by 1069 BCE, Egypt officially entered the fragmented Third Intermediate Period. The empire was over.
So around 1069 BCE, Egypt enters this period of profound transformation and division. The nation functionally splits into 2 main regions.
Right. You have Tanis in the north, where pharaohs of the 21st dynasty held nominal authority.
And Thebes in the south, where the high priests of Amun established what was essentially a religious state.
This unusual power sharing marked a dramatic reversal in Egyptian governance. These priest kings controlled vast temple estates, adopted royal titles, all while giving nominal loyalty to the Tanite kings up north. A very strange setup.
We see cultural adaptations too, those extraordinary archaeological finds at Panis, particularly Pharaoh Susanus, the first exquisite silver sarcophagus.
Silver, which ironically was actually considered more precious than gold in ancient Egypt because it was rarer locally.
And what stands out to you about that specific discovery, that silver coffin?
Well, the historical irony is what really gets me. Pierre Montet discovered that magnificent, intact royal tomb in Tanis in 1939.
Right on the eve of World War II.
Exactly. So this incredible find, rivaling Tutankhamun's in some ways, was almost completely overshadowed and largely unnoticed by a world preoccupied with impending war. Imagine unearthing such a treasure, only for global events to just swallow the news. It's a fascinating detail for you listening to consider.
The profound transformation continued as Libyan military commanders, descendants of mercenaries who'd settled in Egypt for generations, seized power.
They established the 22nd dynasty around 945 BCE. Shoshentai even temporarily reunified Egypt and famously invaded Judah and Israel.
An event recorded both in Egyptian reliefs at Karnak and in the Hebrew Bible as Shishak's sacking of Jerusalem.
Then came the Kushite, or Nubian, conquest from the south, around 745 BCE. Now, this often gets depicted as just another foreign invasion.
But it's more nuanced than that, isn't it?
Yeah.
How did the Egyptians themselves view their Kushite conquerors?
Well, interestingly, it wasn't always viewed simply as a foreign invasion. Often it was framed, especially by the Kushites themselves, as a divine mission to restore Egyptian religious purity and traditional values, which they felt the Libyan rulers had neglected.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, Kushite rulers had deeply absorbed Egyptian culture for centuries.
Absolutely. Their administration used hieroglyphics, they built Egyptian-style pyramids in Nubia, they worshipped Egyptian deities like Amun. So their intervention was often seen, or at least presented, as preserving genuine Egyptian tradition, not destroying it.
King Pi, the first Kushite pharaoh, for instance, famously insisted on ritual purity before entering the conquered city of Memphis.
Right. And later, Kushite pharaohs like Taharqa were ambitious builders, revitalizing Egyptian architecture at Karnak and constructing impressive monuments back in their Nubian homeland. They saw themselves as true pharaohs in the traditional mold.
Their rule, however, was soon challenged by the relentlessly expanding Assyrian Empire in the 7th century BCE.
Yeah, the Assyrians brought formidable iron weapons and incredibly brutal warfare tactics, a real shock to the system.
The ultimate humiliation came in 663 BCE when Ashurbanipal's forces sacked Thebes, the sacred heart of Egypt. They carried off immense wealth and struck a devastating blow at Egypt's spiritual identity.
But, as often happened in Egyptian history, from the ashes of this foreign domination, an Egypt determined to reclaim its identity emerged.
Samtikhane-Nest, initially an Assyrian vassal ruling from Sais in the Delta.
He cleverly capitalized on Assyrian internal problems back home to reunify Egypt and establish the 26th dynasty around 664 BCE. This was the last significant native Egyptian royal house.
And this period is often known as the Sate Renaissance. It sounds like more than just a nostalgic glance backward, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What was the strategic brilliance behind this cultural revival?
It was a masterful strategic move, absolutely. It was about consciously reconnecting with the glories of the past to legitimize their rule and unify the country after periods of division and foreign control.
How did they do that?
Artisans deliberately copied thousand-year-old tomb reliefs from the Old and Middle Kingdoms. Scribes recovered and recopied ancient religious and literary texts. They created this powerful illusion of timeless continuity, reaffirming a collective Egyptian identity.
So using the past to unify the present and reclaim identity, a timeless playbook for cultural resilience.
Exactly. But paradoxically, this intensely nostalgic period was also Egypt's most internationally connected era up to that point.
How so?
Greek mercenaries became crucial to the State army, and Greek traders established a major settlement at Naucratis in the Delta. This led to vibrant cultural exchange, hybrid Egyptian-Greek artistic styles, a real mix.
But then, a new superpower emerged on the horizon, the mighty Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great.
Yeah, Persia dramatically altered the balance of power across the entire ancient world.
And in 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II invaded Egypt. There's that famous, though maybe exaggerated, story about the Battle of Pelusium.
Ah, the one with the cats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That Cambyses used psychological warfare by placing cats and other animals sacred to the Egyptians in front of his army, knowing the devout Egyptian soldiers would hesitate to fire arrows or attack.
Whether it happened exactly like that or not, it powerfully highlights the cultural clash, doesn't it? But Persian rule wasn't always just brutal oppression initially.
Yeah.
Well, Persian kings like Cambyses and especially Darius, I did adopt Egyptian royal titles. They funded temple restorations, supported Egyptian religious ceremonies, trying to rule in a somewhat traditional way.
Right.
But they also imposed unprecedented levels of taxation and resource extraction. Egypt became a wealthy province, a satrapy, exploited for the benefit of the vast Persian Empire. It was clear who was really in charge.
There were brief periods of native Egyptian rule later, the 28th to 30th dynasties fighting for independence.
Right, a last gasp of native resistance. But the Second Persian conquest in 343 BCE brought even harsher repression. It seemed like Egyptian independence was gone for good.
But just about 11 years later, in 332 BCE, a new conqueror arrived on the scene, Alexander the Great.
And incredibly, he was largely welcomed as a liberator from the hated Persian oppression.
The priests at the remote Siwa Oasis Oracle even declared Alexander a son of Amun, granting him crucial divine legitimacy in Egyptian eyes. A stroke of political genius, or perhaps genuine belief?
Alexander's most monumental decision regarding Egypt, made in 331 BCE, was to found a new city on the Mediterranean coast.
Alexandria, designed by Dinocrates of Rhodes as his crown jewel.
It quickly became a multicultural metropolis, a major port, and a beacon of Hellenistic learning and culture, perfectly reflecting Alexander's policy of cultural fusion.
After Alexander's sudden and unexpected death, his vast empire fractured. One of his leading generals, Ptolemy or Soter, shrewdly secured control of Egypt.
Famously, or infamously, by hijacking Alexander's funeral cortege as it was heading back to Macedon, diverting the body to Egypt to be entombed, lending immense prestige to his own rule.
He founded the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would rule Egypt for the next 300 years, from 305 down to 30 BCE.
And under the early Ptolemies, Alexandria truly flourished. It became the undisputed intellectual and commercial center of the Hellenistic world.
Boasting wonders like the Lighthouse of Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, guiding ships into its harbor.
The legendary Great Library, aiming to collect all the world's knowledge, and the Musen, effectively the world's first state-sponsored research institute, an incredible center of learning.
But this era also introduced some, well, shocking royal practices, particularly from a Greek perspective.
Ah, you mean the sibling marriage.
Exactly. The Ptolemies adopted the ancient pharaonic practice of brother-sister marriage to keep the bloodline pure and consolidate power, something previously unthinkable in Greek culture.
And it led to increasingly unstable rulers, didn't it? And some breathtakingly brutal palace intrigues, assassinations, civil wars.
Ptolemy VII, for example, notoriously murdered and dismembered his own nephew, who was also his stepson, and sent the body parts to the boy's mother, Cleopatra II. Just horrifying cycles of violence.
And Rome's lengthening shadow falls over this period, too. Ironically, the Rosetta Stone, which was key to deciphering hieroglyphs,
Dates to the reign of Ptolemy V, and it actually documents concessions the weakened king had to make to rebellious native Egyptian priests. It's a sign of the dynasty's fading power and growing internal unrest.
which brings us finally to Cleopatra VII, ruling from 69 to 30 BCE, the very last pharaoh of Egypt.
And what a figure, a ruler of extraordinary intellectual brilliance, political cunning, and charisma.
Her linguistic genius alone was remarkable. She reportedly mastered 9 languages, including, crucially, the native Egyptian language, a truly unique feat among the Ptolemaic rulers, who usually only spoke Greek. She could connect directly with her Egyptian subjects.
Her legendary alliances with the 2 most powerful Romans of her day, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony.
Often romanticized, but these were primarily calculated political moves to preserve Egypt's independence, or at least autonomy, against the relentless expansion of Rome.
It's easy to get lost in the romanticized versions, like her supposedly being smuggled to Caesar rolled up in a carpet.
Right. We also have to contend with the propaganda war waged against her by her ultimate rival Octavian, who later became Emperor Augustus.
He portrayed her as this dangerous, decadent, seductive Oriental temptress who corrupted noble Romans, justifying his war against her and Antony.
But archaeological evidence, like portraits on coins minted during her reign, actually shows her as strong-featured, intelligent-looking, perhaps not the Hollywood beauty of legend, but certainly a commanding presence. Propaganda versus reality.
The end came swiftly after the decisive naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian's forces crushed the fleet of Antony and Cleopatra.
Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Alexandria, but Octavian pursued, facing capture.
Cleopatra chose suicide in 30 BCE. Famously, perhaps apocryphally, by the bite of an asp, rather than suffer the humiliation of being paraded as a captive in Octavian's triumph in Rome.
Her death marked the final, definitive collapse of Egypt's 3,000-year independence. Egypt became a Roman province, personally controlled by the emperor. An epic end to an epic story.
So we've journeyed through, what, 3 millennia of unparalleled resilience? We've seen how Egypt adapted, absorbed invaders, mastered new tools, blended cultures.
Yet, somehow, through it all, it always remained uniquely, recognizably Egyptian.
It's incredible to think about. The secret, it seems, was Egypt's profound ability to adapt without losing its core identity.
Yeah, it consistently found ways to integrate new influences, whether Hyksos chariots, Greek philosophy, or Roman administration, while holding fast to its foundational beliefs and structures.
Particularly its relationship with the Nile, the concept of Maat, and the powerful ideology of divine kingship, even as those concepts themselves evolved over time.
Indeed. So, the final thought, maybe, for you to mull over. Despite all the changes, the conquests, the foreign dominations, what enduring qualities or principles from ancient Egypt do you think allowed it to maintain that recognizable Egyptianness for so incredibly long?
And maybe, do those principles, that blend of stability and adaptation, have any echoes, any relevance for how societies try to maintain their identity today in our own rapidly changing world? Something to think about.